At Christmas dinner, my father-in-law stood up, raised his glass, and said he was proud of every single grandchild at that table. Every single one. Except mine. He pointed at my 8-year-old daughter, smiled like he'd just told a joke, and the table laughed. And my daughter, my little girl who had spent 3 weeks making him a handmade Christmas card, looked at me with tears pooling in her eyes, trying so hard not to cry in front of everyone. I felt something break inside me that night. Something quiet and irreversible, like a bone that snaps clean. But here's what I didn't know. My son, my 19-year-old, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table all evening, had been waiting for exactly this moment. He reached down, pulled a manila folder from his bag, set it on the table with both hands, and said, with perfect calm, "Speaking of pride, Grandpa, let's talk about your second family." My mother-in-law's wine glass slipped from her fingers, and then she hit the floor. "My name is Derek Calloway. I'm 44 years old, and I spent 12 years trying to be good enough for a family that had already decided I never would be. What happened that Christmas changed everything. Not just for me, but for my wife Amber, for our kids, and for a man who had built his entire life on a lie so enormous that it took a 19-year-old with a folder to bring it all crashing down. This is the whole story, and I'm not leaving anything out. Before we go any further, if you've ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single update. Drop a comment below and tell me, has someone in your family ever humiliated you in front of others? And don't forget to give this video a like. It helps more people find stories that matter. Now, let's go back to the beginning. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the son of a high school football coach and a woman who worked 30 years as a hospital administrator. We weren't rich, but we were solid. My parents believed in two things: hard work and showing up. If you said you'd be there, you were there. If you made a promise, you kept it. That's the world I came from. I met Amber Whitfield in the fall of 2003 at a mutual friend's barbecue in Columbus. She was 22, studying occupational therapy, with dark brown hair and a laugh that made you feel like whatever you'd said was the funniest thing in the world. I fell for her in about 45 minutes. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, and married in the summer of 2006 at a small church outside Columbus, while her parents stood in the front row looking like they'd swallowed something sour. That's how it started. With a look. Amber's father, Lawrence Whitfield, was a man who had built his identity entirely around a single idea, that he came from something better. He'd grown up in a nice suburb of Cincinnati, worked in commercial real estate for 30 years, and accumulated the kind of quiet wealth that doesn't announce itself. It just hums in the background, in the cut of a jacket and the model of a car, and the way a man pauses just a half-second too long before answering a question he considers beneath him. He had decided before he ever shook my hand that I wasn't right for his daughter. I was a structural engineer. I worked for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, made a good living, carried no debt except our mortgage, and coached my son's little league team on weekends. But none of that registered on Lawrence Whitfield's internal scorecard because I didn't have a last name he recognized, and I hadn't gone to the right school. His version of right, which was somewhere with Gothic architecture and a rowing team. Amber's mother, Patricia, was gentler by nature but had spent so many decades orbiting Lawrence's gravity that she had lost her own sense of direction. She echoed him. Always. Whatever Lawrence thought, Patricia thought. Whatever Lawrence felt about someone, Patricia felt it 3 days later. She was a kind woman trapped inside a life she'd agreed to long before she understood what she was agreeing to. Amber knew all of this. She'd grown up inside it. And she loved her parents with the specific, exhausted love of someone who has been disappointed so many times that the disappointment has become its own kind of comfort. Familiar, at least. In the early years of our marriage, I tried. God, I tried. I showed up to their house in Hyde Park with wine I couldn't afford. I learned about Lawrence's interest in Civil War history and read 3 books just to have something to say to him. I fixed a leaking pipe under their kitchen sink one Thanksgiving without being asked, on my hands and knees for 2 hours, while Lawrence sat in the living room watching college football and never once came to check on me. I remember coming out from under that sink with grease on my forearms and water stains on my shirt, and Lawrence looked up from the game and said, "You get it?" And I said yes. And he nodded and turned back to the television. "No, thank you." No acknowledgement. Just a nod, like I was a serviceman who'd come to fix something and could now be dismissed. I drove home that night telling myself it didn't matter. That's what you do. You negotiate with yourself about what matters. Because if you let everything matter, you'll never be able to sit at that table again. And Amber needed me at that table. I sat in the parking lot of a gas station outside Hyde Park for 20 minutes. Just sitting. Amber texted to ask where I was. I told her I'd stopped for gas. I hadn't. I just needed 20 minutes to put the lid back on whatever was trying to come out of me. Then I drove home, and we watched television, and I didn't say anything about it. That was year 3 of our marriage. I did some version of that negotiation for 9 more years. Amber noticed. She always noticed. She'd squeeze my hand in the car on the way home and say, "You don't have to keep doing this." And I'd say, "He's your father," which was my way of saying, "I'll keep trying. For you." We had our son, Brandon, in 2007. Then our daughter, Lily, in 2016. 2 kids, 9 years apart, wildly different from each other, and equally mine in every way that counted. Brandon was quiet, analytical, the kind of teenager who preferred chess to parties, and had an unsettling ability to remember every detail of every conversation he'd ever had. Lily was sunshine in a 6-year-old's body, then an 8-year-old's body, the kind of kid who made strangers smile in grocery stores and brought home frogs to name and release. Lawrence's attitude toward our children tracked exactly with his attitude toward me. Brandon, who had Amber's last name legally hyphenated, was tolerated. Just tolerated. Lawrence would ask him questions about school and nod along without really listening. There were other grandchildren in the picture. Amber's older brother Cooper had 3 kids with his wife Stephanie, and Cooper's children were Lawrence's golden standard. They played lacrosse. They went to the right summer camps. They had the right kind of haircuts. And then there was Lily. Lily, who looked exactly like me. My dark eyes, my wide smile, my tendency to talk too much when she was excited. Lily, who had never done a single thing wrong in her entire 8 years on this earth, except exist in a form that reminded Lawrence Whitfield of me. He never said it, not directly. But you don't need direct statements when the message is in 1,000 small moments. The time he brought gifts for Cooper's kids and forgot Lily's. The birthday card for Brandon that had $20 in it, and the birthday card for Lily that had 5. The way he'd ask about Brandon's grades at dinner and then pivot immediately to something else when Lily tried to show him a drawing she'd made. I saw it. Amber saw it. Brandon, who missed nothing, definitely saw it. I thought I had managed it. I thought I had found a way to let it wash over me without drowning anyone, including my daughter, who was too young to understand what she was feeling, but old enough to feel it. I was wrong. The Christmas dinner was at Lawrence and Patricia's house in Hyde Park, the same house they'd lived in for 30 years, a beautiful colonial on a tree-lined street where the lights were always perfect in December, and the wreath on the front door cost more than most people's grocery budgets. It was the 23rd of December. Amber had been cooking alongside Patricia all afternoon. I had driven 40 minutes in light snow with both kids, a trunk full of wrapped presents, and a bottle of wine I'd actually gone to a real wine shop to select this time, on the advice of an employee who clearly took pity on me. Cooper and Stephanie were already there with their 3, Tyler, Addison, and Noah, ages 12, 10, and 7 respectively. They were good kids, genuinely good kids, which made the situation harder in a way, because it wasn't their fault any of this was happening. The table was long and set beautifully. Patricia had outdone herself. Candles, the good china, a centerpiece with pine branches and red berries. It looked like a magazine and smelled like a real home, which was always the contradiction of that house. It looked warm from the outside and felt cold from the inside. Brandon was 19 by this point, home from his first semester at Ohio State, where he was studying finance. He'd driven himself down that morning and had been unusually quiet all day, which I chalked up to the exhaustion of finals. He ate his dinner, answered questions politely, and kept his eyes mostly on his plate. Lily sat next to me, in a red velvet dress Amber had bought her specifically for this dinner. She'd been vibrating with excitement since we got there, because Lily always approached family gatherings with the assumption that everyone was as happy to see her as she was to see them. She'd brought Lawrence a Christmas card she'd made herself. Construction paper, glitter glue, a drawing of a Christmas tree that had more branches than any tree in nature. She'd written inside it, "To Grandpa Lawrence, Merry Christmas. I love you, from Lily." She'd spent 3 weeks on that card. She'd told me about it in the car on the way over, bouncing in her seat, asking if I thought he'd like it. I said yes. I believed it too. Whatever Lawrence's issues with me, I had never been able to fully accept that he would allow them to reach an 8-year-old. I was wrong about that too. It happened after the main course, during that particular moment in Christmas dinners when everyone is full and warm and slightly drowsy, when guards are down and glasses have been refilled. Lawrence stood up. He tapped his glass. The table went quiet. He was a big man, Lawrence. Broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime expecting rooms to rearrange themselves around him. He smiled his country club smile and began to speak. He said he wanted to take a moment to express how proud he was. Proud of his family. Proud of what they'd built. He looked at Cooper and Stephanie and smiled. He looked at Tyler and Addison and Noah and said something about each of them. Tyler's soccer tournament, Addison's violin recital, Noah's reading scores. He mentioned Brandon. He said something vague and adequate about college being a good start. And then he paused. He looked at Lily. And he said, voice perfectly steady, expression pleasant, as if this were a reasonable thing to say out loud at a Christmas dinner. "I'm proud of all my grandchildren, except one." And he pointed at my daughter. The table reacted before I could. There was a ripple of laughter. Not cruel, not calculated. Just the reflexive social laughter of people who aren't sure what else to do when a patriarch says something confusing at the dinner table. Cooper laughed. Even Stephanie let out a half-laugh, quickly suppressed. Patricia shook her head with a fond look, like this was an eccentricity, like she'd heard him say outrageous things before. Lily didn't understand what had happened. She was 8. But she understood the pointing, and she understood the laughter, and she felt it the way children feel things. In the stomach first, then the chest, then the eyes. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at me. I was already standing up. But then Brandon spoke first. He'd been sitting at the far end of the table, quietly, all evening. He sat forward now and he reached down beside his chair and he pulled up a plain manila folder, the kind you'd find in any office supply store, nothing remarkable about it. He set it on the table with both hands, carefully, the way you'd set down something fragile. And in the calmest voice I have ever heard come out of a 19-year-old, he said, "Speaking of pride, Grandpa, maybe we should talk about your second family." The table went so quiet you could hear the candles burning. Lawrence's face changed. I had never seen Lawrence Whitfield's face change in 12 years of knowing him. It had always been controlled, composed, the face of a man who decided every morning to wear a specific expression and wore it all day regardless of what happened. But in that moment, watching his grandson set a folder on the Christmas dinner table, something behind his eyes went dark and afraid. Patricia said, "What on earth?" And then she fainted. Not dramatically, not like the movies. She just went. Her chair caught some of her, and Cooper grabbed her before she hit the floor entirely. Stephanie started shouting for water. Tyler and Addison stared. Noah started to cry. Amber hadn't moved. She was looking at Brandon the way you look at someone you thought you knew when you realize you maybe don't know them at all. I picked Lily up. I held her against my chest with one arm, her face pressed to my shoulder so she couldn't see the chaos, and I looked at my son. He was still sitting calmly, both hands flat on either side of the folder. Brandon had found it by accident. That's the part that still gets me when I think about it. He hadn't gone looking. He hadn't set out to investigate his grandfather. He'd found a thread and pulled it, the way curious people always do, because the thread was right there and it was loose. He told me all of this later that night, the two of us sitting in Amber's childhood bedroom, while the house rearranged itself around us into something unrecognizable. He'd been working on a family history project for one of his classes, a personal finance elective that required students to research generational wealth patterns in their own families. Standard assignment. He'd asked Lawrence about investment history, expecting to hear about real estate. Lawrence had deflected, which Brandon noted. So Brandon, who inherits my tendency to notice things and Amber's tendency to be thorough about it, looked a little deeper. What he found started with public records, property records in Hamilton County, Ohio, where Hyde Park sits. Lawrence owned the house they lived in, which Brandon knew. But Lawrence also appeared in records for a second property, a condo in the Mount Lookout neighborhood of Cincinnati, purchased in 2004. The condo was owned jointly between Lawrence Whitfield and a woman named Sandra Kelleher. Brandon searched Sandra Kelleher. Sandra Kelleher was 53 years old. She lived, as far as Brandon could determine from publicly available information, at the Mount Lookout address. She had a professional profile listing her as a marketing consultant. She had a son, a young man named Patrick Kelleher, born in 2001. Brandon searched Patrick Kelleher. Patrick Kelleher was 22 years old. He had a social media profile that was set to public. He played guitar. He had dark hair and a wide jaw and a specific way of standing in photographs, shoulders back, slight tilt to the head, that Brandon recognized because he had seen it every Christmas of his life at the head of a table in Hyde Park. Brandon said he sat at his laptop for a long time after that, not doing anything, just looking. He didn't tell me. He didn't tell Amber. He spent 2 months verifying, cross-referencing, pulling every public thread he could find before he printed anything. He built a file the way you'd build a case, not out of anger, but out of precision. Because if he was going to do this, he was going to be sure. The folder on the Christmas table contained property records, Patrick Kelleher's birth certificate obtained through a public records request, a photograph from Sandra Kelleher's public social media of herself and Patrick at a birthday dinner where Lawrence's distinctive silver watch, the same watch that sat on Lawrence's wrist at Christmas dinner, was visible on the arm around her shoulder, a card in the background reading "Happy Birthday, Patrick," dated 2019, and a printed email chain that Brandon had obtained through a source he still won't fully disclose to me, but which he described only as someone who was also owed the truth. Lawrence Whitfield had a son, a 22-year-old son named Patrick, born when he was already married to Patricia, already the father of Cooper and Amber. He had been maintaining this second life for over 2 decades. Patricia was revived with water and the particular frantic energy of a family trying to hold itself together by sheer force of collective will. Cooper kept saying, "This isn't the time," the way people say things when they mean the opposite, when they mean this is absolutely the time, but I am not ready for it. Stephanie took the kids upstairs, all of them, including Lily, who went willingly because Stephanie was calm and warm and knew how to redirect children. I was grateful for that. I will always be grateful for that. Lawrence sat back down. He looked at the folder. He looked at Brandon. And then he did something that told me everything I needed to know about the architecture of his character. He said, "You had no right." Not denial. Not explanation. Not sorrow. You had no right. Brandon looked at him steadily. 19 years old, and he looked at his grandfather the way I have never been able to look at him in 12 years. "You pointed at my 8-year-old sister," Brandon said, "in front of the whole family. You made her cry. You've been doing things like that her whole life. And I'm supposed to pretend I don't know what I know? No, Grandpa. I don't think so." Amber hadn't said anything since Brandon spoke. She was sitting very still, the way she gets when she's processing something too large for immediate words. I'd seen it twice before in our marriage. Once when her best friend was diagnosed with breast cancer, and once when we lost a pregnancy between Brandon and Lily. That specific stillness. She reached out and picked up the folder. She opened it. She read it. The sound she made was small and entirely unlike crying. It was more like something collapsing inward. Lawrence watched her read, and for the first time in 12 years I saw something that might have been shame move across his face. Not regret. Shame isn't the same as regret. Shame is about being seen. He was being seen finally by his daughter, and he didn't know what to do with it. "Amber," he started. "Don't," she said. That one word contained 12 years of Sunday dinners and deflected conversations and forced smiles and hand squeezes in the car, and nights she cried quietly so the kids wouldn't hear, and mornings she got up and decided to try again because he was her father, and you keep trying because he's your father. It contained all of that, and Lawrence heard it. We left that night. Not immediately. There were an hour of awful, necessary conversations that I won't recount in full, because some of those conversations belong to Amber and not to me. What I can tell you is that Cooper, to his credit, sat down with the folder and read it quietly, and then looked at his father with an expression I recognized because I had worn it for years. The expression of a person who has been wrong about something foundational and is only now understanding how wrong. Stephanie came back downstairs and stood near Cooper. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Patricia, once she was fully conscious and seated in the living room with a glass of water, became very quiet. The kind of quiet that is not peace, but its opposite. The quiet of a woman who has suspected something for a very long time and has just had the suspicion confirmed in the worst possible way, in the worst possible place, in front of her children and grandchildren at Christmas dinner. She did not look at Lawrence. Not once. We drove home in near silence. Lily fell asleep before we hit the highway, which I was grateful for. Brandon sat in the passenger seat. Amber sat behind me. Nobody talked for 20 minutes. Then Amber said quietly, "How long have you known?" Brandon said, 2 months. Why did you wait? Because I needed to be sure, and because I wanted him to do something that meant I couldn't stay quiet. Another silence. He did, Amber said. Yes, Brandon said. He did. The weeks after Christmas were the hardest of our marriage and some of the most clarifying. Amber went through stages that I watched carefully and gave space to, because she needed space more than she needed me to solve anything. She was angry, at Lawrence, but also at herself for the years she'd spent defending him, explaining him, finding excuses for his coldness and his cruelty disguised as quirk. She was heartbroken for Patricia, who had been deceived longer than anyone. She was, in quieter moments, something I can only describe as relieved, like a woman who had been carrying a weight and finally understood why it had always felt heavier than it should. Cooper called twice in the first week. Both times the calls were about logistics, what to tell the kids, what to say at the office, how to handle Lawrence's circle of colleagues and neighbors. Cooper is a practical man, which is both his strength and his limitation. He was trying to manage the situation. Amber told him, gently but directly, that the situation was past managing, and that maybe the first step was sitting with it. Lawrence tried to call Amber 4 times in the first week. She didn't answer. On the 5th call, she picked up and told him she would speak with him when she was ready and not before, and that there was nothing he could say right now that would be worth hearing. Then she hung up. I have never been more in love with my wife than I was in that moment. Sandra Kelleher reached out to Amber through a Facebook message in early January. I don't know exactly what the message said. Amber read it alone and summarized it for me afterward. Sandra had been in the relationship with Lawrence since 2000. She had believed for years that he was going to leave Patricia. He never did. Patrick, their son, had grown up knowing Lawrence only as a man who appeared occasionally, who sent money but not time, who was complicated, which is the word people use when the truth is too ugly for the person saying it. Sandra wasn't asking for anything. She just wanted Amber to know that she was sorry, that she hadn't intended to hurt anyone, that she had made choices she regretted. Amber wrote back. The exchange was brief and civil. I don't know if they will ever speak again. I don't know if that matters. What matters is Patrick Kelleher, 22 years old, who grew up without a father in any real sense of the word, who is technically Amber's half-brother, who had nothing to do with any of the decisions that shaped his life. Amber sent him a card in February. Just an introduction. Her name, her number, an open door if he ever wanted to walk through it. He hasn't yet. That door stays open. Now, the revenge. I want to be clear about something before I tell you this part. I am not a man who spends his life thinking about settling scores. I believe in general that the best response to someone who has diminished you is to build something they can't diminish. That's always been my approach with Lawrence. Build the career, build the marriage, build the life, and let the quality of it be the answer. But Lawrence didn't come after me. He came after my 8-year-old daughter. at a Christmas dinner, in front of her entire family. And that changed the calculation entirely. Lawrence Whitfield had been on the board of a local charitable foundation for 8 years. A genuine foundation. They funded scholarships for first-generation college students in the Cincinnati area, and they did real good in the community. Lawrence treated his board position like a crown. He mentioned it at every dinner. He was photographed at galas. He gave the kind of speeches that make people forget, temporarily, what kind of man is delivering them. He was up for the board chairmanship in March. It was, according to Cooper, who told me with a careful neutrality that suggested she was presenting information and not asking my opinion, the thing Lawrence had been working toward for 4 years. I am a structural engineer. I understand leverage. Not the financial kind, the physical kind. The principle that a small force, applied at exactly the right point, can move something enormous. I wrote a letter. Not an angry letter. Not a dramatic letter. A careful, factual letter addressed to the Foundation's executive director and its current board chairman, summarizing the contents of Brandon's folder, the property records, the documented second family maintained covertly for over 20 years, the way this information had come to light at a family gathering when Lawrence publicly singled out and humiliated an 8-year-old child in front of the assembled family. I wrote that I believed the Foundation's donors and stakeholders deserved to make informed decisions about who represented their values in a leadership capacity. I attached the relevant public documents. I sent it certified mail on a Tuesday in February. The board did not make Lawrence chairman. They also asked him to consider stepping down from his current seat, citing concerns about the reputational impact on the Foundation's fundraising. This was communicated to him privately. Lawrence told no one in the family. Amber found out through Cooper, who found out through Stephanie, who had a friend on the Foundation's volunteer committee. Lawrence lost the one public role that had given his image its polish. Was it enough? Probably not, in any cosmic accounting. Probably nothing is enough for what he did to Lily and to Amber over the years, and to Patricia and to Patrick. But it was something real that reached him in a place he valued, and it was built on nothing but the truth. That was enough for me. It is now 9 months since Christmas dinner. Lily doesn't fully understand what happened that night. She knows her grandfather said something unkind and that her brother stood up for her. She knows that we don't go to Lawrence's house anymore. She knows that Grandma Patricia sometimes calls on Sunday evenings and talks to Mom for a long time. Patricia left Lawrence in February. She is living in a small apartment in Cincinnati's Oakley neighborhood, close to her sister, and Amber calls her every week. The conversations are not always easy. Patricia is processing 50 years of a marriage she is now rereading with new eyes, and that process is painful and slow. But she is doing it. At 68 years old, she is doing the hardest thing, which is looking clearly at a story you've told yourself for decades and asking whether it was ever true. I respect her for it more than I can say. Cooper is quieter now. Something rearranged itself in him after Christmas, and the new arrangement is, I think, better. He stopped performing the role of the favored son when the audience for that performance collapsed. He and Amber talk more honestly than they ever have. Last month, he came to Columbus for a weekend, and we all had dinner. Him, Stephanie, Amber, the kids, me, and it was the most comfortable I have ever felt around Cooper. He apologized to me in the driveway before they left. A real apology, not a managed one. I accepted it. Brandon is back at Ohio State finishing his sophomore year. He calls every Sunday. He has not apologized for what he did at Christmas because there is nothing to apologize for. But he did tell me once, quietly, that he was sorry it had to happen that way in front of Lily. I told him, "You protected your sister. You did what I should have done years ago. There is nothing in that I would want you to feel sorry about." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I just want her to know she's worth protecting." Lily knows. She made Brandon a card last week. Construction paper, glitter glue, a drawing of a boy and a girl holding hands. She wrote inside it, "To Brandon, thank you for being my brother. I love you. From Lily. She spent 3 weeks on it. He called me when he got it. He couldn't talk for a minute. He just held the phone. And neither could I. I want to leave you with something I have been thinking about since December. Lawrence Whitfield spent 50 years being proud of a name. He curated his image so carefully, kept his secret so close, built such a perfect surface of respectability that even his own family was deceived. He sat at the head of a table he had set, and poured wine into glasses he had chosen, and spoke about pride to people whose love he had taken for granted. And it took an 8-year-old girl with tears in her eyes and a 19-year-old boy with a folder to show him what pride actually costs. The things we do to children stay with them. Every moment of being excluded, dismissed, pointed at, made small. Those moments live in children's bodies long before they reach their minds. Lily may not remember every detail of that Christmas when she is grown, but she will remember how she felt. She will carry some version of it. And she will also carry her brother standing up. She will carry being worth protecting. That's the thing about families. They are not just the damage they pass down. They are also the repair if you're willing to do it. Amber is doing it. Cooper is doing it. Patricia, in her small apartment in Oakley with her sister nearby and her phone calls on Sundays, is doing it. And I am doing it. Every day. In the 1,000 ordinary ways that don't make for dramatic stories, but make for a life that holds.